music wise. We know I've heard the term and I believe it, but I want to hear your perspective on music being weaponized. You
Right.
know, do you think that's far fetched, or do you think you know that's a real thing? And if you
Right.
think it's a real thing, talk a little bit about how music is being weaponized against the urban community.
Right. So yeah, another nuanced question. I definitely think that music can and is being weaponized. I think two sayings are true. Both are true, that life imitates art, art imitates life, right? So there is that perspective that where the rappers today are imitating what they see in reality, right? But there's also a sense in where you have a lot of these kids. I think even Juice WRLD said it, to where he, he started doing drugs and stuff because he heard Future songs, and stuff like that. And so I do think there's a double entendre in a sense. There's a double influence, a double negative, to where life is imitating art, art is imitating life. And so with that, you have these record execs and you have different people at the top who they don't necessarily care about you or me or our skin color, whatever. They care about the green, which is the mighty dollar, right? And so because of that, they're willing to sign any artist who's willing to, to promote selling drugs, to promote women degrading, especially black women, degrading women, disobeying your parents, whatever it is that they're promoting that's negative, that's detrimental to our community. They're willing to promote that because that doesn't get people thinking. That doesn't get people to unify and say, hey, how can we bring change? That's not a threat. Basically, what I always tell people is that when you look at a lot of these artists and even people in Hollywood, they're not necessarily threats. And the black community as a whole is not necessarily a threat to the higher powers. And so because they're not a threat, and because everybody, again, that crab in the bucket mentality and that mentality of like, I just want to make money, right? Because you think about
Right.
it, when we see Trayvon Martin or somebody get gunned down, D-Ray, Rico, y'all can testify, we feel like that could have been our son or our brother
Correct.
or whatever, right? Because there's a
Correct.
sense of, even though with all the stuff going on, there's still somewhat of a sense of unity, because that's how we were bred, the black community. When something happens to somebody white, it's always individualized. They don't see it as a holistic, you know what I'm saying? When somebody white shoots up a movie theater, even though it happens so often that, you see mass shootings, they don't look at it as like, this is white, this is a white thing, this is whiteness, this is from the white community. But when somebody black does something for whatever reason, it always represents our entire community, right? So to go back to the music, it's the same thing. When you have people who are just trying to make it out, and they've been disenfranchised, they've been marginalized or oppressed to one degree or another, whether it be by police, the system, etc. And then they get a little money, well, they want to wild out. And so you have, I think it was Kendrick Lamar who said it on what was that, To Pimp a Butterfly, where he was talking about Lucy, which represented Lucifer, the devil, right? And then you had where on the first track he was talking about like where he was Uncle Sam, and he was basically saying, get your money, you go to the mall, spend it all, stuff like that.
Right.
Basically
Right.
saying
Right.
like, yo, I can, you can do all this stuff. Like, man, I have you tap dancing, man. I'll put you in front of the world, almost like what Satan did with Christ. I'll
Right.
show you the world, the kingdoms of the world, and hey, you could have a man, just serve me. And so that's how I feel like the industry uses a lot of blacks. It's like,
Froze up there.
and you would see that, wow, well, they don't really think much of black women, according to the music. So there is that
So,
level of weaponizing.
so I want to ask you this question, and there's been a lot of talk. I know at one point, man, you was in the reforms. I met you back
Years
2000
ago.
2008, right? And I remember you coming.
You
I
met
had
me before the internet, bro.
way
Before they had
before
the
the
internet,
internet,
bro.
man. And I remember when IV man brought you into my studio. I had a big studio off of Beach Boulevard,
Right.
and you come through, man, and this cat man spitting. I've seen a huge transformation. The thing is, man, from one perspective, they're brethren because that's brothers that know you, don't know you, you
Right.
know. But we see a lot of issues in the church when it comes to white evangelicals, and even with us, even in blacks in the church, we don't like to kind of talk about the truth. We run from it. We deflect from it. Why? Because when you cut on the news, you see all these things happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're living in life, you see situations that people have. Why is it that we in the church, man, we're afraid to talk about, if it's a real situation, man, we go to scripture, but we don't want to acknowledge the situation. But yet, when we put gas in our car, we don't pray to put if we don't pray and put spiritual gas in the car. We physically take a gas pump and we physically have to take that take that nozzle off the pump after we unscrew our door or the top of the pump, and we physically have to take this pump and put it in there, but
Right.
we're acknowledging that we're pumping an actual tangible item in that pump. But when it comes to problems and dealing with solutions, but before you can get a solution, let's talk about why it's an issue that we can't talk about in the church and how it's affecting the community.
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes back to just conditioning. Like I was saying, even whether it be white affirmation, you also have in religious circles where, on the one hand, they talk about transparency, but they don't actually believe that. Just like they talk about we need to reach lost people, or whatever you want to call them, sinners, people that are outside the four walls. They say that, but then when you bring those type of people in, then there's the funny looks, there's the stares, there's the gossip, there's things like that, right? So it's almost like they want to have something that looks tangible or feels tangible without actually having the reality. I think there's a verse in the scripture where it talks about always learning, but denying the power, or having a form of godliness, but denying his power, right? And so you have a mass segment of society, especially here in the States with Western Christianity and things like that, where everybody is about wanting to put on that mask, not keeping it real, to the point where it's like, because if you keep it real, they say that, but then they use that against you. Next thing you know, they kicking you out, or they gossiping about you. They using prayer to spread your business, whatever it is, right? So when it comes to these issues, they want to be able to the matrix. They want to be able to stay in the matrix. For any of us that saw that movie, you remember with Neo, where he thought he was in reality. And he ended up, he was asking Lawrence Fishburne, like, yo, like, why did my eyes hurt? He said, because you never used them before. And I remember the one guy he killed, I forgot who it was, but the white guy in there, he knew that he was in the Matrix, and he knew the food was fake, but he would rather stay in the Matrix and continue living a lie than to actually face the truth, because the truth was more fearful. He was more fearful of the truth than of the false reality that he was in. You know what I'm saying? So I think a lot of people in society, in religion, in these churches today, they are afraid of the truth. So, for example, when you talk about racism, like, if we really break down what racism is, it's much more deeper than just somebody trying to burn your house down, or trying to burn a cross down, or throw rocks in your window, or you nigga this, or whatever like that. It's so much deeper than that, right? So one of the ways that they convinced us after the civil rights era, and we were able to vote and things like that, one of the ways that a lot of these churches and society and even our community was able to convince us that these things went away is because they used the easily identifiable things, like, trying to kill you, trying to stop you from voting, different things like that. And so they looked at society and said, look, remember, you couldn't eat at this restaurant, now you can. You couldn't sit in the front of the bus, now you can. You couldn't drink out of this white water fountain, now you can. And they took that as progress. They took that as equality, when in the reality, if you look at history, there's always been, when you think you're taking 2 steps forward, you're really taking 3 steps backwards. You know what I'm saying? There's always been this facade. And so the government and the powers that be, and the people that are running things, they have a way about them. They know how to give you these breadcrumbs to make you feel like it's a victory. They know how to they'll allow you to win a battle, because for them, it's about the war. You know what I'm saying? So they're like, hey, we'll keep winning the war. We'll throw you a bone every now and then. Hey, we'll give you a black president. You know what I'm saying? It'll let you, you'll really be comfortable now. You know what I'm saying? Like, y'all feel like y'all came so far, but when you look at the policies, still police killing us, all type of stuff, unfair trials, right? So going back to the church, I think there's a level of what I call it is intellectual, lack of intellectual integrity. And what I mean by that is, when you have a lot of these people that are not believers, that are not believing in God, whether they be agnostic, atheists, etc., a lot of times they bring up real concerns or real issues that when they say, why do you believe this? Why does God do this? And instead of the believer or whoever saying, you know what, you're right, or instead of them giving a good answer, they want to go back to either cliches or they want to live in this false reality, right? So they don't want to acknowledge, like, you know what, you have a point. Like, hey man, this does kind of, when I'm reading the Bible, hey man, this does kind of seem jacked up, right? So I always tell people, and this is, if y'all don't know anything else or hear anything else tonight, hear this. I always tell people, just because I believe in God doesn't mean I agree with God. You know what I'm saying? So I always tell people, I always believe in God. I don't always agree with God. And my disagreement with God does not make God wrong. It doesn't make me right. It just means I either don't understand or I just don't
Right.
agree. You know what I'm saying? When you look at the plight of blacks in America, I ask people, I'm like, yo, where's God? Like, I don't like, yo, this is happening. Like, yo, what kind of, this is a really sick world. You know what I'm saying? And of course we could talk about sin and all that stuff. I get it. 2 + 2 is 4. It still don't make sense to me. You know what I'm saying? So it's a thing that I have to wrestle with, but it doesn't mean that my faith in God is gone. But when you have people question that, people don't want to deal with those realities. So they either have to hit them with cliches or they have to ignore it and say, well, yeah, man, you just that's just that evil in you. You know, you need that demon cast out of, like almost like, what's that movie, Exorcist?
Right.
You need, so you're denying the reality of what's going on. So like you said, so they don't want to talk about real issues. They don't want to talk about sex. They don't want to talk about the gang violence. They don't want to talk about police violence. They don't want to talk about systemic oppression, because then that makes somebody responsible. And if somebody's responsible, then they have an obligation to change. You know what I'm saying? And those people who benefit from that privilege, they don't want to change. They don't want to have one brother said to the privilege, even equality feels like oppression.
Right.
I'm gonna say that again. He said I think it was BJ Thompson. He said, to the privileged, equality feels like oppression. So when you talk about black rights and you have white folks that's like, bro, like, chill out with that. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, whoa, well, don't you want us to be equal? It's like, no, really, our equality is basically taken away from their reign or their dominance. And they don't want that. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of churches, to keep the camaraderie, the quote unquote, the false unity, they have to ignore these issues. Don't talk about race. We don't see color here. All the cliches. We just try to focus on God. Jesus didn't see color, even though he created all the different colors and you know what I'm saying, all the time like that. Even though he himself was a person of color, but you know what I'm saying.
Now, Chris just said something. Chris jumped in. Chris said, okay, the disagreement is not with God. It is with the people who misrepresent God. Okay.